welcome to Hockey Night Online. I'm Monika Platek, and all season long, this has been the show where you decide what you want us to talk about, the teams that you want us to focus on, and that's why today we're putting the spotlight on probably the most controversial and heartbreaking team this season, the Vancouver Canucks. So if you're watching along with us, there are a couple of different ways to interact. You can find us on Twitter, as always, and on Facebook. I'll be checking my phone throughout the show. But we do need to bring in an expert to answer all of your questions, and that's why I'm so happy to introduce Kelly Hrudey of Hockey Night in Canada. Hello, Kelly.
Hey, Monika. Good to talk to you again.
It's really good to see you as well. I think I haven't really seen you since Sochi, Russia. But here we are joining via Skype, and we're going to start off with the Canucks today because there are so many questions surrounding this team. And as I said, fans, they want some answers. Not sure they're going to get them anytime soon, but as we know, the Vancouver Canucks are missing the playoffs for the first time in 6 seasons. So here we are with our first Twitter question: who gets canned after the season ends? And we actually have a lot of questions on this topic. So here's another one very similar along the same lines. Who's going to be the new GM? Of course, assuming there that Mike Gillis gets the boot.
That's unlike fans to want to go for the throat right off the hop, isn't it? I don't know if it's necessarily that somebody's going to lose their job. They might be Mike Gillis, might be Tortorella, but I think more than anything, when you look at this team and the players they have involved, you have to just do a complete debrief on the season and figure out, is it because the players are declining in talent, or is it a combination of maybe a slight decline and an injury problem? There are lots of different things. Maybe a system, maybe they're not, maybe the coach wants them to play a different way. There are lots of different questions that need to be asked before you just automatically fire somebody. This is a team that has been in decline. Now, that you have to figure out first. Is that a player issue? Is that whatever things come to mind? You have to really go through this at great length to figure out what you have. Is it that the management and the coach, they're fine, and that the players need a revamping? Maybe this is a group that's stale now. All those sorts of things have to go through long discussion before we start firing people. I always kind of get offended when people just want to automatically have people lose their jobs, because that's the worst case scenario. You have to find a way to find a solution, and if that does involve people losing their jobs, so be it. But let's not be too quick to and too harsh here.
Well, obviously, Kelly, because this season has been so disappointing, we know that fans are just looking for someone to point their finger at and really take that blame because it needs to be accounted for when it comes down to it. Like I said, they're missing the playoffs for the first time in 6 years. So let's turn to the players now because, like you said, it can't just be the management to blame. And a question here about D-man Jason Garrison. Kelly, have you heard anything at all about them buying him out?
Well, there are rumors of that. Now, I will say this. When you look at Jason Garrison, he's at, after this year, he has 4 more years at $4.6 million. That's his cap hit. When you look around the league, that's a pretty attractive number, considering what he brings. And you look at some other players. Edler on their team has 1 more year than that, and he's at $5 million a year. So, and I think you have to explore more so, how can you get better play out of these guys? And Edler's the #1 guy you think of on that back end. Here's a really good hockey player that's had a really bad last half of the season. He had not a bad start, maybe not as good as he can be, but when he plays to the level he can be close to an elite defenseman. So I think the #1 question there is, does he need a change? Or can we get him back to being the same player? And if we choose to keep him, then we look at other options, like if maybe Garrison is maybe a trade bait instead. Buyouts are, you have to look at the complete number and how this works for the organization. I think some of these rumors that we keep hearing, whether it's who to fire or buyout things, I think sometimes it's just too quickly, people come to these conclusions too quickly, as opposed to really sitting down for a month or so and going through your entire roster and what your needs might be down the road.
Okay, so let's move away from the blue line and talk about the offense, which has been lacking this season. And again, don't want to point any fingers, but when you're talking about the two most expensive players, you're talking about the Sedin twins. And obviously they have not been producing this season like they have in the past. So JDirt31 says, why does one twin go missing in action when the other one's injured?
Yeah, that's a great question. That shouldn't be the case. I would have to say that the two players underperformed this year. Injuries, of course, were a bit of a factor, but nonetheless, when they're in the lineup, they didn't play the same way that they need to play. Now, having said that, when they both were in the lineup, they had a hard time finding a third guy for that line. Their usual partner, Alex Burrows, had a horrific season in terms of injuries. He could never really get back on track, and Burrows is an excellent player, and he will score again. He's just too determined and too good a hockey player to have another season like he did this year, unless, of course, injuries reoccur. But the Sedins, they just did not play to their strengths. I watched Daniel recently, and I don't know if he's still affected by that hamstring injury that he received in the game in BC Place, but he just does not look like he's moving very well at all, not generating anything. So they have them for another 4 years after this season, and the Twins are going to have a better year. And they're going to have to learn, even though they're well into their National Hockey League careers, to play with other players, because at this point, you have to expect they're not getting any younger, and they may have injury problems down the road. So they've got to really work at being effective with other players.
Well, that's right. I mean, they have this undeniable chemistry as twin brothers, but they need to play as individuals when it comes down to it. Okay, so we're talking about the D, we talked about the offense. We have to talk about goaltending. The biggest topic this season with the Vancouver Canucks, and who saw that coming? Both Schneider and Luongo being traded away. So Miker is asking, my biggest question, why have both of our #1 goalies been dealt?
Who knows? It was the most unlikely scenario, wasn't it? You had the Vancouver Canucks had two phenomenal goaltenders in their organization a year ago, and then now they have guys that are only just trying to find their way and learn their craft. And so this is going to be an interesting summer for them to figure out if Eddie Lack, #1, can turn out to be a pretty good National Hockey League goaltender, and where Markstrom turns out down the road. There are some rumors, and I think there's some validity to them, that they may be looking to add a goaltender, an experienced guy, and the #1 name that seems to be coming up is Yaroslav Halak. Now, he's certainly not a National Hockey League star, but he's certainly effective, and he's really steady, and he has a relationship with Rolly Melanson, the goalie coach for the Canucks. So I could see that being a potential fit. And Halak could be good, I think, in the sense that he'd come at a pretty reasonable cost, and he would really be beneficial, I think, in the development of Eddie Lack and Markstrom.
Well, you can see the support from the Vancouver Canucks fans when it comes to Eddie Lack. Obviously, they understand the circumstances, and they appreciate the fact that he is trying to step up as much as he can, right?
He is. He's, well, both guys are good. They're really good people. They're really great in the dressing room, good personalities, but you have to give them time. And Eddie Lack, of course, has the upper hand on Markstrom right now, but Lack is a guy that has shown lots of potential. And you look at his numbers from after Luongo was traded, and there's no question that they're not as good as they were before, but that's to be understood, and that's to be expected when you consider the pressure changed. There's no question when you're Lack and you have Luongo as your other guy, it's a safety net. You feel really good. You don't feel overwhelmed with the burden of being a #1 guy. And when that changes, it feels as though you're almost all alone, and you have to do it by yourself, and you put too much pressure on yourself. So I think the fans recognize that he's made progress this year, and just wait and see where that goes.
He's a young goalie, so he's definitely had to mature very quickly through this entire situation. Okay, so we already talked about who to blame and where to point the finger, and so we're going to kind of go back to this, because the John Tortorella experiment hasn't gone so well this season. So when you're looking at, the GM versus the coach, how much of this poor showing by the team should be put on either one of them?
Well, they're in charge. So most of it has to go on them initially, and then, like I said earlier, then they have to go through the entire team and figure out if this is a team that can win down the road or if this is a team in decline. But I think also when they look at this season, they'll have to reflect upon themselves and see what they could have done differently as management or as a coach. And I think sometimes when you look at it from the coaching perspective, John Tortorella, he'll have to look at his roster and decide whether or not the style he likes to play and the style he likes to coach will work with this group. And I think this group, it's safe to say, will look a little bit differently, because I think it's pretty certain to say that Ryan Kesler won't be around at the start of next year. They'll get a lot in return for him. He's an excellent player, but clearly there's a bit of a disconnect now. And so they'll have to figure out, is it a little bit of tweaking or is it a major overhaul? And that includes management, coaches, and some players, or is it just tweaking the players?
Okay, you just touched on it there, the Ryan Kesler situation, and you're saying the chances are high that he won't be there next season, but his name was trending for days before that trade deadline, yep, and he stayed put. So for our final question here from Twitter, from Jagdeep, what are the chances again of Ryan Kesler still being a Canuck by the start of the new season? Just elaborate on that a little bit more, right, Kelly.
I can't see it. When you have discussions with your organization as a player that maybe it's time to go elsewhere, that means that something has to happen sooner than later. Now, of course, the Canucks didn't feel what they were getting in return. Trade deadline was enough to satisfy their needs, because Ryan Kesler's a heck of a hockey player. But I'm sure in the weeks following the season, they're going to have lots of discussion about what his value is on the market, and then start talking to other teams and figure out what's best for the Canucks and where he can go. He has he has to agree to certain cities, so it's not as easy as calling all 29 other teams and finding out what the market will provide for you, because he's a part of this equation.
Okay, so looking forward to this weekend before you go. We have a lot of action coming up on Hockey Night in Canada. We have a Friday night game and then a ton of games on Saturday. Again, I'll be chatting live at cbcsports.ca during all of that action. But Kelly, what are you looking forward to most in this final week of the regular season?
Well, I'm going to be keeping my eye on the top teams in the Western Conference, and simply because I think, just as my job requirements will be in the playoffs, I think I'll have a series in the Western Conference. So I'm going to make sure that I'm up on what's going on with the West, whether it's lines, injuries, who's hot in net, those sorts of things. Last year, Monica, you might remember that my duties in the first round of the playoffs were doing color for the Kings and the Blues first round series, and that was, I'm not exaggerating here, that was the best round of hockey I watched the entire playoffs last year. So forget about the finals, forget about the conference finals. That first round matchup was unbelievable. Everybody knows the first round's the hardest round to get out of. So for that reason, I'm really looking forward to what might happen in the West in the first round. And it could be a potential matchup between Anaheim and LA, maybe LA, San Jose. Boy, just terrific hockey to look forward to.
Well, there are such powerhouse teams in that wild, wild West, so it'll be a lot of fun to watch. And with the playoffs, you have hockey every single night of the week, right? So how can you complain about that?
Exactly.
All right, well, Kelly, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and taking the time to answer all of these questions from fans.
My pleasure, Monica. I'll see you down the road.
All right, Kelly Hrudey from Hockey Night in Canada. As I mentioned, he'll be very busy this weekend with Hockey Night action on Friday and Saturday. That's all for Hockey Night Online today. Remember to keep those questions coming as we enter the final week of the NHL regular season. I'm Monika Platek, and I'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye, Kelly. Thanks, buddy.